My name is Wren. I am 30 years old. And the moment my father's coworker walked into his office on a Tuesday morning in March and asked if he was related to the woman whose name was in the opening credits of a new network series, my father had no idea what to say. He had never watched the show. He had not known it existed. He had spent 4 years operating on the assumption that I was still drifting, still embarrassing the family name, still lost somewhere inside a creative delusion that would eventually exhaust itself and force me to come home and admit he had been right. He had been so certain of this that he had not thought to check. He had not thought to ask. He had simply continued telling the story of me that he had decided was true, and it had not occurred to him, not once in 4 years, that the story had continued without him in it. That assumption was the most expensive mistake he ever made. Not expensive in money, though there was money, and I will tell you about it. Expensive in the specific currency of being wrong about a person for so long that the correction no longer fits inside an apology. Expensive in the way that certain silences cost you, permanently, and without refund. I want to tell you exactly how we got there. I want to tell you about the Thursday evening in November, the table of 31 people, the clock above the mantel, the specific weight of being dismissed in front of everyone you have ever known and choosing, quietly and without drama, to do something about it that takes 4 years to complete. I want to tell you about the drive home on I-83 and the parking lot, and the decision that didn't look like a decision at the time because it was too quiet and too internal to look like anything from the outside. But first, I need to tell you what my family looked like before any of this happened, because the Thanksgiving dinner was not a beginning. It was a conclusion to something that had been building for the entire length of my conscious memory, and without that context, the story is just a story. With it, I think it becomes something else. My father's name is Gerald Alcott. He is 61 years old, and he has worked in commercial real estate brokerage in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 34 years, which means he has spent 34 years operating inside a world where success is visible, measurable, and communicated through specific markers: the size of the deal, the name of the client, the listing price, the commission. He is not a cruel man in the way that some fathers are cruel. He is not loud or physically intimidating or prone to rages. His cruelty, such as it is, has always been the quiet administrative kind, the kind that expresses itself through what is acknowledged and what is not, through who gets introduced by their accomplishments and who gets introduced by their name. My younger brother Colt is 37 now, but when we were growing up, he was the clear and unambiguous favorite, and this was not a secret anyone bothered to keep. Colt was good at the things my father understood: team sports, linear thinking, the kind of confidence that reads as competence before it has earned the right to. He played varsity lacrosse. He was pre-law at Penn State. He joined a fraternity my father had also joined, which my father mentioned approximately twice a year for the entirety of Colt's undergraduate career, and at least once a year afterward, long after it had become merely a data point rather than a current fact. I was good at different things. I was good at writing. I was good at seeing how stories were constructed, at noticing the particular technique by which a scene in a film or a television show produced an emotional response in its audience, at understanding the mechanics of character and structure and dialogue. I was good at staying inside my own head for long stretches without becoming anxious. These are not skills that communicate themselves at a dinner table. They do not have a visible output until they have an output, and until then they look, to a man like my father, like nothing at all. My mother, whose name is Patricia, has a different relationship with me than my father does, but it is not uncomplicated. She has always known that I was capable. She has said so, privately, in the kitchen, away from my father, in the particular tone of women who communicate their true assessments only in rooms that their husbands are not in. She did not defend me publicly. She did not contradict my father in front of family. She had her own accommodation with the structure of that household, built over 33 years of marriage, and I understood it without approving of it, and it did not make me love her less, but it did mean that I had never once expected her to be the person who stepped in. I graduated from Temple University in May 2017 with a degree in film and media arts and a GPA of 3.81. My father attended the ceremony and took photographs and bought dinner at a restaurant he chose, a steakhouse he preferred, which I had never particularly liked, and said, over the main course, that the degree was fine as a backup as long as I was pursuing something with real income potential alongside it. I was 22 years old. I had already accepted a production assistant position at a commercial production company in Philadelphia, which paid $34,200 a year, and which I did not tell him about, because I had learned early that information given to my father became ammunition in future arguments rather than context for understanding his daughter. I want to be clear about that pattern because I have seen people in situations like mine blamed for the distance that develops when they stop sharing themselves with their families, as though the withholding is the original wound rather than the response to one. I stopped telling my father about my life because every piece of my life that I gave him came back to me reshaped into evidence that I was failing. I did not make that choice out of spite. I made it out of simple self-preservation. There is a meaningful difference between June 2017 and November 2020, which is the span from my graduation to the Thanksgiving dinner. The pattern of holiday conversations was consistent enough that I could have written the transcript in advance. My father would ask, in front of whichever relatives were present, whether I had figured out a direction yet. I would give a brief and nonspecific answer. He would nod in the way that people nod when they are not listening but are confirming their existing conclusion. Someone would change the subject, usually to Colt, whose trajectory, first job at a firm, then a second job at a better firm, then a third at a name-brand firm in Philadelphia with an actual partnership track, was a reliable source of conversational momentum in any gathering of Alcotts. My Aunt Diane, who was my father's sister-in-law through his brother Marcus, had been a reliable amplifier of my father's assessments since I was approximately 14 years old. She was not a malicious woman, exactly, but she was the kind of person who experiences other people's opinions as facts once those opinions have been expressed confidently enough by someone she respects, and she respected my father the way small satellites respect the gravity of a larger body, completely and without examining why. If my father said I was drifting, Diane concluded I was drifting and repeated it to cousins, to her own children, to anyone who asked, with the particular confidence of someone who believes they are sharing useful information. I had made my peace with Diane by the time I was 23. She was not the problem. She was the echo. It was 5:47 p.m. on a Thursday, the third week of November 2020, and I was sitting at my parents' dining room table watching my father carve the turkey the way he carved every turkey, with the authority of a man who believed that doing something loudly and with a specific tool was the same thing as doing it well. There were 31 people in the house. My mother's 2 sisters and their husbands. My uncle Marcus and his wife Diane and their 3 teenagers. 7 or 8 cousins. My maternal grandmother, who was 81 and had perfected over the course of her long life a strategy of smiling at everything without comment, which I had always privately admired as the most sustainable possible response to a family like ours. And Colt, who was 26 and in his second year at the firm and who had been introduced to every new arrival at that table by his professional status, his firm's name, the trajectory of his career. Colt, at Harrington Reeves now, doing really well the partnership track. I had been introduced as Wren. The question came from my cousin Britta, who was 24 and worked in pharmaceutical sales and had recently gotten engaged to a man named Scott who sold commercial insurance and was exactly as interesting as that sounds. Britta asked me what I was working on in the polite, automatic way that people ask questions they have already decided they do not need the answer to because the question itself is the social act, not the listening. I told her the truth. I was writing a television pilot. I had been working on it for 8 months. I had a production company in Los Angeles that had expressed early interest and asked to read the full script, and I was revising the second draft based on their feedback. Britta said, "Oh, wow." Then she turned to the table, not out of malice, I think, just the reflex of someone who has identified a conversational item that might generate discussion, and said, "Wren's writing a TV show." My father set down the carving knife at 6:03 p.m. I know the time because I had fixed my eyes on the clock above the fireplace mantel at the precise moment I understood what was about to happen, the way you reach for something stable when you feel the floor beginning to move. "It's not a TV show," he said, with the particular patience of a man correcting a misapprehension rather than attacking a person. "It's a project she's been working on, a hobby she's treating like a career." He did not look at me when he said it. He picked the carving knife back up and resumed his work. The table absorbed the comment the way tables absorb comments at holiday dinners, by continuing, slightly louder, with whatever adjacent topic was already in motion. My Aunt Diane set down her water glass and said to no one in particular, which in her vocabulary always meant everyone present. Gerald always said that creative work was for people who weren't willing to do the hard thing and commit. She used his first name because she had been using his first name to lend authority to his opinions since I was 14, and the habit had never weakened. There were nods. There was a lateral movement of conversation toward Colt's recent case victory. The moment sealed itself over like water over a stone. I finished what was on my plate. I carried my plate and my glass to the kitchen, which was empty. I stood at the sink and ran the water over both of them, slowly, and set them on the drying rack. I went back to the dining room. I said I had a long drive back to the city. I hugged my grandmother, who held my hand for a moment before she let go. I hugged my mother, who squeezed my arm in the particular way that she used instead of words when she had something she could not say. I said goodbye to the table generally and walked to the front door and got in my car and drove. Before I tell you what happened over the next 4 years, and I want to tell you all of it slowly because the slowness is the point, tell me where you are right now. Tell me what the weather is like where you're watching from and what time it is for you tonight. I want to know how far this story travels, because the distance matters to me. The drive back to Philadelphia that night was 2 hours and 17 minutes in light traffic, and the distance I covered on the inside of that drive was considerably longer. I spent the first 40 minutes of the drive not crying, which took more effort than I want to admit. I spent the next 23 minutes crying, which was necessary, and which I was grateful to do alone, and in the dark where no one could make it into something it wasn't. I spent the last hour and 14 minutes of the drive in the kind of quiet that arrives after something shifts. Something inside me went completely still somewhere on I-83 south of York, somewhere in the dark between exits, with the highway lights coming in through the windshield at intervals. Not the stilling of defeat. I had been defeated before, and it felt like collapse, like something giving way. This was something else. This was more like the feeling of a decision that has been approaching for a long time finally arriving, and recognizing that you have been building toward it without knowing it. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building on Fairmount Avenue at 8:54 p.m. I sat in the car for 6 minutes. I called my friend Cassidy, who lived 2 blocks away, and who had read every single draft of the pilot I had written, and who had the rare quality of understanding when you need someone to be present without needing them to say anything useful. "I'm in the parking lot," I said. "Are you okay?" "I'm going to stop explaining myself to people who have already decided the explanation doesn't matter," I said. There was a pause. Then she said, "Yeah." And then, "Do you want me to come over?" I said no. She said okay. We stayed on the phone for 9 more minutes without talking much, and then I went inside. I did not call my parents that night. I did not call them the next day or the day after. I sent my mother a text on Sunday that said I had gotten home safely, because she would worry otherwise. She responded with a heart emoji, which was her version of the kitchen arm squeeze. On Monday morning, November 23rd, 2020, I sat down at my desk at 6:45 a.m. and opened the second draft of the pilot, and I started working. The production company that had expressed interest in the pilot was a mid-size independent company based in Burbank, California, called Ironwood Pictures. They specialized in drama, with a particular focus on character-driven limited series for broadcast and streaming. The creative executive who had reached out to me was a woman named Pamela Osei, who had been in the industry for 16 years, and who communicated with the particular economy of someone who has learned that most of the time that gets spent in development conversations is spent saying things that do not advance the work. I had sent the initial query in October 2020. Ironwood had responded on November 3rd, a Tuesday, asking to read the full script. I had sent it the following morning. Pamela Osei had called me on November 16th, 8 days before Thanksgiving, for an initial development call that lasted 47 minutes. She had 3 pages of notes. None of them were encouraging in the way that notes are sometimes used as encouragement. All of them were useful in the way that notes are useful when they are written by someone who has actually read the material. I did not tell my family about any of this. After the Thanksgiving dinner, I went home and I worked. I revised the second draft over the following 6 weeks, incorporating Pamela Osei's notes, and working through 3 structural problems in the second act that I had been avoiding because they required rewriting 2 scenes I liked and replacing them with 2 scenes that were harder to write but more honest. I sent the revised draft on January 7, 2021. Pamela Osei called me on January 19th with a second round of notes, shorter this time, more targeted. She said the script was getting close. Close to what? I asked. Close to something I can show people, she said. I spent those 18 months, from November 2020 through the spring of 2022, inside the work in the way that I think only becomes possible when you have removed all other noise from the equation. I was not performing my progress for anyone. I was not constructing a narrative about my journey to share with relatives at future holiday dinners. I was writing, revising, thinking, listening to notes, and writing again. I was paying $1,340 per month in rent with my production assistant salary and a part-time copywriting job I had picked up in February 2021 that paid $1,840 per month on a flexible remote schedule. I was eating moderately well. I was calling my mother on Sundays and giving her nothing specific to share with my father. I was talking to Cassidy most evenings. I was 30 or 40 pages into a second pilot idea, which I was developing for no particular reason except that the work itself had become the point. In September 2021, Pamela Osei told me she wanted to bring in a co-showrunner before taking the project to network pitch. She had someone in mind, a television writer and director named Derek Sue, who had 2 previous network shows on his resume, one a mid-season drama that had lasted 2 seasons and built a devoted audience, and one a procedural that had run for 4 seasons and made everyone involved considerably more employable. I had a call with Derek Sue on September 14th, a Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and we talked for an hour and 20 minutes, and by the end of the call I understood that he had spent the same kind of attention on the script that Pamela Osei had, which is to say serious attention, the kind that takes the work on its own terms. He had 3 questions he wanted the next draft to answer. I spent the next 8 weeks answering them. The project was formally packaged for network pitch in January 2022. I was 27 years old. I had not told my family anything about any of this. I had attended Christmas dinner in December 2021 and sat at my parents' table and answered my father's, "What are you up to in the city these days?" with freelance work, keeping busy, which was accurate in every literal sense and communicated nothing that he would have done anything useful with. On February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day, which I note only because I had plans that evening that were preempted and which I did not resent at all, Pamela Osei called me at 6:38 p.m. to tell me that the network had responded to the pitch with what she described as serious enthusiasm and wanted to move to a formal development deal. She told me the preliminary offer would be coming through Marcus Lund, my entertainment attorney, within the week. She told me to keep my schedule clear in March. I sat down on my kitchen floor after I hung up. I sat there for 11 minutes. Not celebrating, exactly. Not crying. Something more like the experience of a weight that has been resting on your sternum for 4 years lifting very slowly, and the physical strangeness of the space it leaves behind. I called Cassidy. I did not call my parents. My entertainment attorney, Marcus Lund, received the preliminary offer on February 21st and reviewed the full contract documentation on February 22nd. He identified 3 clauses requiring renegotiation, one pertaining to sequel and spin-off rights, which had been written in the network's favor in a way that was not standard for a co-creator with showrunner credit, one pertaining to international distribution participation, which was absent entirely, and one pertaining to credit arbitration, which contained language that could have been used to reduce my executive producer credit under specific circumstances. Marcus Lund is thorough and unhurried, which are the 2 qualities I most value in a lawyer who is working on something that matters to me. The renegotiated contract was executed on March 4, 2022. The deal included a total development and production payment of $287,400, structured across 4 milestones, with back-end participation and co-creator and executive producer credit on the final produced series. I was 27 years old. I had been working on the project for 2 years. I had been working toward the project for 5 years before that, in the way that all the work you do before the specific work counts as preparation, even when it doesn't feel like anything at the time. I moved to Los Angeles on April 9, 2022. I told my mother on April 3rd. She said, "Oh, Wren," softly, in a way that contained both pride and something that was not quite grief but was adjacent to it, the particular feeling of watching someone step permanently out of a radius you had been keeping them in, even without meaning to. I told my father in a text message on April 4th. He responded, "Keep me posted." He did not ask what I would be doing there. He did not ask whether I needed anything. He did not ask about the project, which by this point had been in formal development for a month, because he did not know about the project, because I had not told him, because the version of me he had been maintaining in his understanding of the world was a 26-year-old with a hobby and no direction, and that version of me was the only one he had the map for. I came back to Philadelphia for Christmas 2022. It was the last time I saw my father before the premiere. We had dinner at my parents' house, Colt and his girlfriend, my grandmother, my parents, and me, 6 people at a table that usually held 31, which had a different quality than the big holiday dinners, smaller and more quiet, the conversational load distributed across fewer shoulders. My father asked me what I was up to in LA. I told him I was in post-production on a television project. He nodded and cut into the roast and asked what post-production involved, and I explained it briefly: editing, sound mixing, color grading, scoring, and he listened with the expression of a man receiving information in a language he does not speak and processing it as confirmation that the language is impenetrable rather than as a reason to learn a few words of it. "Do you have a backup plan?" he said, "in case it doesn't land the way you're hoping?" "I don't need one," I said. "That's optimistic. That's intentional," I said. He looked at me for a moment in a way that was new, not the dismissal, not the patience of a man who has already reached his conclusion, but something closer to uncertainty, like a person who has noticed for the first time that the thing they've been measuring has grown past the edge of their ruler. Then he picked up his fork and the moment moved through and past us, the way moments do at family dinners when no one wants to follow them to where they lead. I helped clear the table after dinner. I watched football with Colt and my father for an hour. I hugged everyone and drove back to the hotel I had booked because sleeping in my childhood bedroom had been making me feel, for the past several years, like a person who was trying to fit back inside a shape they had grown out of. I flew home to Los Angeles on the 27th. On the drive to the airport, I thought about whether I felt anything in particular about the way the conversation had gone. I was not angry. I was not hoping for anything. I had stopped hoping for specific things from my father sometime during the second year of working on the pilot, around the time I realized that the energy I was spending on wanting him to see me was the same energy I needed for the work, and that the work was the thing I could actually control. The premiere was March 14th, 2023, a Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. I watched it from a production company event in a rented venue in Burbank. Cast, crew, production staff, network representatives, Pamela Osei and Derek Sue and Marcus Lund, and approximately 60 other people who had spent 2 years building the thing with me. The energy in the room when the opening credits rolled was the kind of energy that exists when a group of people have been working toward a single fixed point for a very long time and have arrived there simultaneously. My name was in the credits. Co-creator. Executive producer. Written by Wren. The overnight ratings came in at 3.1 million viewers. By the following morning, the show was ranked 5th nationally in its Tuesday night time slot. The Hollywood Reporter ran a brief piece on the premiere that mentioned the show's strong debut and described me in one sentence: co-creator and executive producer Wren Alcott, a Philadelphia native, making her network debut. That sentence existed on the internet, publicly, indexed and searchable by anyone with a name to look up, at 8:17 a.m. on the morning of March 15th, 2023. My father's co-worker Terry found it at approximately 8:45 a.m. My brother Colt told me what happened next in a phone call at 9:47 a.m. Terry had watched the premiere with his wife the night before and had recognized my name during the opening credits, not because he knew me, but because Alcott is my father's last name too, and it is not a common name, and he had done the mental arithmetic. He had looked it up that morning and confirmed it. He had walked into my father's office, which was, in the geography of the story, the precise location where 4 years of work had been invisible to the one person I had wanted it to be visible to, and asked Gerald if he was related to the woman in the credits. My father said he didn't know what Terry was talking about. Terry showed him the network page on his phone. He showed him the Hollywood Reporter piece. He showed him my name, next to my title, next to the logo of a show that 3.1 million people had watched the previous evening. According to Colt, my father went very quiet. He said something brief. He closed his office door. By noon on March 15th, the company's internal communications team had sent a staff-wide email with a link to the Hollywood Reporter piece and a note about it being a local interest item, and someone on staff had replied all with the observation that Gerald had a connection to the story. The thread had apparently generated 22 responses. My father did not call me on March 15th. He did not call on the 16th or the 17th. On the morning of March 18th, a Monday, at 8:23 a.m. Pacific, my phone showed his name on the screen. I was at my kitchen counter, making coffee. I watched it ring. I watched it ring a second time, and a third, and a fourth, and then the screen went dark and the voicemail indicator appeared. I poured my coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table. I listened to the voicemail. It was 2 minutes and 41 seconds long. His voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. Not remorse, exactly, but the particular unsteadiness of a person who has had a fixed understanding disrupted and has not yet rebuilt it into a new fixed understanding. He said he had seen the news. He said he was proud of me. He said he wanted me to know he had always believed in me, which was not true in any factual sense, but which I understood to be the closest available version of an apology from a man who had not been taught that apologies were a tool he was allowed to use. He said he would love to take me to dinner sometime if I was ever in Philadelphia. I set the phone down on the table, face down. I drank my coffee. The morning light was coming through the window above the sink the way it came through every morning, clean and unhurried, and indifferent to what had just happened. I did not call him back that day. I went to my desk and I worked. It has been 14 months since the premiere. The show was renewed for a second season on May 2nd, 2023. My father and I have spoken 4 times, brief, careful calls in the space between estrangement and reconciliation that I do not know how to name except to say that they are honest in a way our conversations were not honest before, which is something, even if it is not everything. He has not apologized directly. I have not asked him to. I have thought about whether I need the apology to proceed with the relationship we are building, slowly and without pressure, and I have come to understand that what I need is not the apology but the behavior that would follow from it, which is to say, the actual seeing. Whether that arrives with words or without them, I am willing to wait. Some people spend years measuring themselves against a ruler that was built specifically to find them insufficient. The moment you put the ruler down, not in anger, not in a dramatic gesture, but quietly, as a simple decision that this is no longer a useful instrument, is the moment the work becomes possible in the way it was always meant to be. The most important thing I can offer you from everything this particular 4 years taught me is this. The people who call your dreams embarrassing are not describing your dreams. They are describing their own fear of having had them. You do not need their update. You do not need their revised opinion once the credits roll. You need the next draft and the one after that and the one after that and the willingness to keep working in the dark before anyone has decided to look. If you were in Wren's place, and your father learned about your success from a stranger in his own office on a Tuesday morning, would you have called him back the same day? Or would you have let him sit with it for a while, and let the silence do what 4 years of explaining never could? This channel exists for the stories that don't get told at family dinners, the ones that take years to complete, the ones that end not with a confrontation but with a quiet morning and a cup of coffee, and the knowledge that you built something real. If that's the kind of story that matters to you, stay.